Hi, my name is Fred Wheeler, and I run the HowtoDandD YouTube channel. And this is a Lost Mine of Phandelver Dungeon Master Guide or tutorial. Specifically, this is targeted as being part 2 of the Lost Mine of Phandelver, Cragmaw Hideout. And the idea behind this is primarily to cover that location, not necessarily to explain how to roleplay all the NPCs. You can check that sort of thing out on YouTube because I've made videos on those topics. Now, the intention behind this is to explain how the Cragmaw Hideout encounters can be run. And when I say can, that doesn't mean they have to be run that way. You can change any of this. You can ignore what I say. I'm also going to demonstrate a lot of this, okay, around some of the stuff around role-playing the monsters, exploring the cave, running the flood trap, adjudicating some of the combats or combat, but maybe it's not a combat, maybe it's something else. We can do other things with it, and allowing you to participate if you want to near the end. Now, the idea behind this is that I will cover each location. Each location has got a few notes. I'm not going to discuss things that you have already got in your adventure. So if it's already stipulated in your adventure, why would I go over it again? So I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the things that you probably would have to figure out yourself. So our first step is we're going to get to the cave mouth. When we get to the cave mouth, we're going to do a couple of things, okay? First off, this is the cave mouth here, and this is our group. Now, when I don't know if you can necessarily see where they are. Maybe I haven't turned the camera far enough through so you can. Okay, there we go. So now you can see pretty much everything. So this is the characters. They won't necessarily be this far away from the cave mouth, but since my map is not big enough, I can't do very much more with it. So therefore, I'm just positioning them here. So imagine that the characters are further away. The first thing you're going to do is you'll read out or paraphrase the box text and then ask your questions the players what they want to do. My suggestion to you is you do not need to read directly from the text, but you can, and it is. I know a lot of people don't think you should do that sort of thing, but it's not an issue. I would never even consider it being a problem. The characters can sneak up to the cave mouth. They don't have to. They can do this by making a stealth check. The DC is going to be a 10. Now, why is the DC 10? It's because the passive perception of our goblins is a 9, and they must get greater. We're dealing with a contest. This is to avoid being detected by the goblins. Now, this is going to be a group check. With a group check, we would normally have all of our player characters make the rolls. And if half the group are successful, get a DC 10 on their check, then the whole group is successful. And the idea behind this is that those people who score really high help those who are doing very poorly and actually improve their ability to get to the location successfully. Now, I know a lot of people don't like group checks, but I'm going to encourage you to use them. There is a place for them, and they can be extremely helpful. And the more you can get your players to do things together at the right time, I think it's something you want to reward. That's just my opinion. Now, if the player characters don't sneak up to the cave mouth, then the goblins are going to notice them before they get to the stream, right? These goblins in the blind here, they will notice them. Now, if they step into the stream, they make enough noise, and it doesn't matter if they're being stealthy, the goblins are going to notice that they're there. Okay, so how do we deal with this? A perception check can be made once the characters are by the goblin blind. So our first step is whatever the modifier is for a character that we're going to be utilizing. So we'll just do a quick stealth check here for those of you who are unfamiliar. So stealth check, and we'll pick one of the player character sheets. Now, you'll find this is usually listed in the skill section, and we're looking for stealth. Currently, I have the cleric in my hand, and so we look for stealth, which is a -1, which is pretty bad, and it's got a star beside it, so that means that they get disadvantage as well, for anybody who is wondering what that is for, okay? So we take 2 20-sided dice. Where are they? And we'll roll a stealth check for the cleric. Okay. And we're going to take the lowest result on our 20-sided dice. So I got a 12, I got a 7. So we take 7 minus 1 equals 6. Okay, so that's pretty bad. Now, I could do that stealth check for every single person, but I'm not going to. I'm just giving you an example in this case. That's how you do your stealth check. Okay, and then you're going to use compare all of those and use a group check, which we're kind of going to go over very shortly anyway. Now, with regard to making a perception check, if they get to here and they don't step in, or somebody does, they don't step into the stream, then they can make a perception check. Now, I've taken down all of the passive perceptions for the characters in advance, quite deliberately, so that I can use them, because that's my flaw. So first thing is, I'm going to look, okay, so I'm going to get the wizard to make the check, or the fighter. So I'll pick the fighter, shall we? So a perception. Okay, there's our check. And we're going to see if we can notice these goblins that are over here. So how does that look? Well, first off, I'm just going to take one 20-sided dice, and I'm going to be adding 3 because the perception modifier is a 3 for the fighter. Okay, so it'll be 3 plus whatever I roll on the dice. So I rolled a 4 equals 7. Now I would compare that with the stealth check of the goblins. That is if the goblins are actually hiding in the blind. It's up to you as a dungeon master, because these goblins aren't apparently focused on the task completely. So you decide whether you think there is actually going to be a contested stealth check. If there is, then it'll be 6 plus whatever we roll on the dice. So 6 for our stealth, the goblins. And then we roll a 20-sided dice. And I'll get a 6 equals 12. Now, that means that the perception score for that fighter is too low. They wouldn't notice the goblins hiding there. But here's the thing. If you decide that the goblins aren't actually hiding and not to use a stealth check, okay, because they're actually just doing their thing, they've just got a big thicket in front of them, then it won't matter what the player characters actually roll with their dice. If they're standing here, that means they don't need to really roll anything particularly well to be able to notice there are goblins behind the thicket. To make it really, really easy for yourself. I know that sounds really complicated, but there are times when, unless people are actually doing, actually consciously doing things, you may not need to actually roll any dice whatsoever. So don't feel like you have to every single time. Okay, so let's have a look at the goblin blind itself, which is this location right here where these 2 goblins are. So again, you might wind up with a fight taking place here. You might not. Players might sneak up on them. There's lots of different things that can happen. But you're only going to read out this section, okay, the goblin blind, once they are actually in there. If they're over here, don't bother reading it out. But when they are there, you can read out or paraphrase the box text and ask the players what they want to do. Again, same sort of stuff, same process. You might like to have the goblins playing cards or dice. This is something that I did myself. I found my players were quite amused that they were occupied doing other things, and you might find that it helps in your game to make it a little bit more interesting and shake things up a little bit. Even if a goblin yells out a warning, so even if they discover that there are intruders coming and they yell out a warning, no one in the cave is going to be able to hear their scream for help. Now, why? Because the waterfall noise is so great, and it's going to get drowned out. But at least one of these, or even possibly both of these goblins, will make a run for the cave mouth to try and get help if they can. If they can't, they won't do that, right? That's probably the easiest way to run these goblins. They are there just as sentries. These goblins will not wait around to talk to the PCs usually, as they probably will fear their leaders. The wrath of Klarg is greater than whatever fear the players could instill into them. So they're probably not going to engage any kind of discussion with him. But you can do that if you want to. I would say that it doesn't necessarily eliminate negotiation or bribery as an option for the player's characters. It just depends on what your player characters decide to do. One of the best strategies that your players can perform is if they have the sleep spell. The sleep spell could easily take out the goblins, take them all down without a fuss, and they could just tie them up and gag them, and that whole encounter would be done and dusted. You don't necessarily have to voice that to your player characters, but you might find that that will assist those groups who are struggling with making a decision, because I know a lot of people are doing this for the very first time. Sneaking past the goblin sentries is really unlikely. Now, why is that? Because of the gap right here. I'll just move this out of the way for you. This gap right here means that they can see anybody crossing through here, and the fact that they can hear anybody stepping into the stream is problematic, okay? Because of that gap in the thicket itself and the noise they would make stepping onto the stream. The thicket itself, if anybody is shooting through this thing, then treat it as if they have a cover bonus of +2 to their armor class. Count it as half cover. I know this is a question that tends to come up. So given the sort of nature and description, half cover seems appropriate in this situation. Now, you've got a question. How would I go about getting this specific map? I would prefer to have it prepared, then draw it out. Yeah, I understand. So you don't have to draw it out. To get this map, you can probably get, depending on where you look, you may be able to get a high resolution copy of this map. I believe that's what I've done. The easiest way is to get it off Mike Shaley. You have to pay for it. If you don't want to pay for it, you're going to have to look around. I'm not going to give you a link for that sort of thing. I can certainly give you a link to Mike Shaley if you would like, but you'll find almost all of the videos I do on YouTube include Mike Shaley's map link, so you can go and download the map for yourself. You'll find you can probably download the map for anybody who's using a virtual tabletop. You can probably access that pretty easily through Roll20, I believe, was offering The Lost Mine of Phandelver for free for a period of time. I don't know if that offer still exists. So you may be able to get it off them. And there may be other places as well. Once you get the high resolution map, and I believe the one without the numbers is, I think the greatest number is 4,500, and the one with the numbers has 4,950 is the greatest. I think, is that the resolution? I printed the high resolution map onto an A1 size paper. It's hard paper. It's quite dense. Okay, it was relatively expensive, so if you're wanting to print it out, that's the easiest way to deal with that particular situation. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. All right, so getting to the kennel. Again, you don't read out the section till they actually get close enough to actually see. So when let's just assume that these goblins are now out of the commission, and so our group is continuing on. Whoever is in front is whoever's in front. Okay. And when they get here, you can read out the section here when they can see it. So read out or paraphrase the box text and then ask them what they want to do. There's so many different things they can do in this location. And so therefore give them an opportunity to try something out. There are 3 wolves in this cave, but only 2 of the wolves will be visible initially because one of them is behind a rock. Now, don't worry about how the map looks. It's up to you. How you want to describe this. You can place the wolf here, you could place the wolf here, but basically one of the wolves is not currently visible. That's the easiest way to describe that. That doesn't mean that they will stay hidden or invisible forever. That's just how you started off. Okay, the wolves can be ignored. You don't have to do anything with this location. They could go straight past area 3 and the wolves and the kennel and just move on to the next thing, which is fine. Sneaking past the wolves is very unlikely. Now, why is this? Wolves have a strong sense of smell, even though the stat block for these things is kind of odd. It's not like there's anything that indicates in it that you should have a benefit or a bonus to it. I would suggest to you that just use what makes sense. Often your job as a dungeon master is a product of what makes sense rather than what should I do. Okay? And you'll notice that it does have keen hearing and smell. So what does keen hearing and smell mean to you? Well, it essentially means that they have advantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on hearing or smell. I wouldn't even worry too much about rolling the dice. It's just simplify things for yourself. You can roll dice, but again, unless the characters are actually deliberately sneaking past the wolves and can't be seen, and the cave mouth is open, right? This location is not in darkness, essentially. We get into darkness further on. So it means that this area here is actually still well lit. So the wolves will be able to see them. So there's nothing to hide behind. Plus they can potentially smell them. So sneaking past the wolves, probably not something that they can do. So I wouldn't worry too much about considering that an option. So yeah, just a quick idea in terms of how to adjudicate that, in terms of what I do if they want to sneak past, because somebody will probably mention it as an option, right? They'll try to give it a go. Calming the wolves can be achieved with soothing words. Look, if they can say something and they say it in a soothing way, or they make gestures, like whether they role play it or whether they roll dice, that's really up to you. Okay, the DC is 15. It's a wisdom check or an animal handling check, and giving the wolves food or rations will distract them. I would ignore the DC 10 animal handling check, as it's really unnecessary. This is an easy check to achieve. Throwing the wolves some food, letting them eat that, and then moving on is perfectly acceptable as well. Now, if they throw them food and want to move into the kennel area and start exploring this location, then I would say it's going to get a bit more complicated, because the wolves are only going to be eating that food for a certain amount of time before they'll be moving on to doing something else, which is probably eating the player characters or barking at them or trying to do something else. Player characters who want to try and take one of the wolves as a pet will find that it's kind of impractical without lots of time, as the animal is a wild animal and it's also hostile. That doesn't mean they can't do it, but there are some things that they would probably have to do. It's not like just allowing a persuasion charisma check of DC 20 would be a solution, but you could allow a persuasion charisma check or even an animal handling check of DC 20 if they want to try to make friends with them. I don't think that's probably the best way to go about making friends and taking the wolves on as pets. I would suggest that befriending the wolves, or one of the wolves, is something that's special magic, like the animal friendship spell. So you can see page 212 of the player's handbook for that, or something like a druid who transforms into a wolf, or the beast master ranger companion feature may allow them to sort of have a better chance of negotiating a friendship with the wolf. But a lot of these things will take time, not going to be guaranteed. So you can have a look at the Beastmaster Ranger companion feature. It's on page 93 of the player's handbook. This might be able to achieve what the players are looking for. So if you wind up with this coming up. Now, what about the fissure at the back? The fissure is in the rear of the kennel, is the back door to Klarg's cave. And he can, I would say that it can be ascended with a DC 10 strength athletics check, right? In the adventure, that's what it states. I think one of the things that people sort of talk about is like, how many times do I have to roll this DC 10 strength athletics check? I would just have them roll it once. It gives you some degrees of what happens in terms of failure. So if they don't succeed, the adventure actually states that there are different things that can happen when they fail. Failing doesn't mean that they necessarily fall. Failing just means that they may not be able to climb up. If they fail to get up the first time, then certainly consider giving them the opportunity to do it again, because it's probably something you can just continue to try again, scaling the chimney shaft. Now, climbing the fissure is not necessarily the best action to take, because only one player character can climb to the top at a time, and it will split the party and leave them in a really peculiar position where Klarg is right there with the wolves and a couple of goblins. And so one party member could find themselves fighting all four of them all at once, and the rest of the party are then trying to get up and past them, which unless they can move far enough out to give the party space to actually get into the main cave, then they're probably not going to get there. So just consider that. I would, I know people have done it successfully, but it's a really risky maneuver. Okay, so there's a steep passage. The steep passage is over here. Now, a lot of different things will happen here in the steep passage. There is no light source once we get to here. Right? There's no light from the mouth of the cave anymore. So if you have dark vision, you can see, but not very well. Okay, it's not good vision. Dark vision doesn't mean you can just see normally. Okay, it means that you can see, but it's poorly. So a character without dark vision will need a light source to see. So when they get to about here, and one of the party members doesn't have a light source, and say, look, you can't see anything more unless you have a lantern or a torch or a candle or something like that, so you can actually see where you're going. Player characters with a light source, when they get here, are probably going to find that they are going to give away their location. This is what the adventure already says, okay? They give away their location to the goblin who is on the bridge in Area 5, and that'll happen automatically. All you need to do is light a torch and be here, and they don't need to make any kind of check. They just know automatically, oh, look, big light, must be somebody coming, okay? Players' characters can attempt to hide in the darkness. So even though creatures who have dark vision can see in the dark, they can't see clearly. So that means that the player characters can hide in the dark from the goblins, and the goblins can hide in the dark from the player characters, particularly if they're just using their dark vision and they don't have a light source. Does that make sense? Essentially, it means that you get a penalty to your perception check. It's a disadvantage or a -5 to passive perception. The easiest way to do this, right, is just, okay, all right, I can hide in darkness even with creatures with dark vision. If the PCs aren't being stealthy in the darkness, they will be noticed. Like, you need to do something about keeping yourself quiet. Quiet's not the issue, it's being seen. But the goblin is actually looking down here to see if anybody's coming. Any kind of player character with dark vision, as I said, has disadvantage on perception checks in dark caves or darkness, as does the goblins, -5. Okay, read out or paraphrase the box text and ask the players what they want to do when they get to this location here. They may decide to go past it, and they may decide to go up that location. It's up to them. Players' characters will need to give, trying to talk in this location is making noise, right? They're not going to give away their position by having a big chat here, even to a goblin over here. The noise from the waterfall is so great that talking in this location doesn't make any difference. Okay, so they can make noise, they can clunk around, it's all good. And it's simply because of that waterfall in the Twin Pools cave in Area 7 making so much noise. If the goblin notices the player characters intruding, it sneaks away and it will signal for the flood traps to be released. This can be done twice, not just once, but twice. So the goblin might sneak across the bridge or move over here and signal this goblin over here, who will then get the others to trigger the trap. It's probably the simplest way to approach doing this. Most characters wearing armor will weigh over 100 pounds, which is what will trigger the slide on here, okay? So when climbing up the rubble, should anybody decide to do so, or in escampment, is it escampment? I think it is. Anybody who's small size and is not wearing armor, okay, is probably, I'm talking probably in this, and when I say armor, let's say somewhere in the vicinity of light leather armor is probably not going to be a big issue. It's probably, they'll be probably light enough. But if they're small size, or they're a wizard or a sorcerer or even a monk, then climbing up here is probably not going to be an issue for them. But other characters would struggle. So those are the times. It's an easy fix for trying to figure out, rather than getting everybody to calculate how much they weigh, which is a giant pain in the butt, and you don't want to do that. Okay, the overpass, area 5 right over here. This is this bridge. So read out or paraphrase the box text if they're on the actual bridge itself. I wouldn't bother otherwise. The goblin can be standing on or near the bridge, so you can put them over here and looking down this way, or put them on the bridge and looking down. Okay, the easiest way to sort of figure out where they are positioned. On or near the bridge, looking down towards the cave mouth. Players' characters with dark vision, as I said before, will have disadvantage on perception checks to notice the hiding goblin on the bridge. And so what I would actually do in the case of this goblin is I would actually have it make a stealth check and just set it up here. And so the players' characters, if they are looking down here to see what's up there on that bridge, then you can have them use their passive perception. If they want to, if you feel that an active check is suitable, then get them to roll a perception check. Okay, easiest way to deal with that. Ignore the instructions about having the goblin throw javelins from the bridge. It's just ridiculous. It's not what a goblin would do. That goblin's job is to keep guard. So my suggestion to you is just have the goblin signal twice and then retreat, either towards the Twin Pulse Cave, or it can even go the other way if you wanted to. So signal twice and then move on. It would make more sense to have the goblin on the bridge act as a runner to inform everybody and all the goblins in the cave of intruders. So that goblin can inform these goblins here and then go the other way and inform the goblins that are in the goblin den, the eating cave. Yep. Sorry, I need some water. Right. Now, yes, Todd, you're correct. Mike Shaley made and sells the map files on his website. Yeah, and it is an extremely good map. And as you can see, it turned out great on a A1 size printed page. So absolutely suggest giving it a go. Okay, so Area 6. This is the Goblin Den. A lot more going on here. There's a lot more threats. Remember that sleep spell. If players have got the sleep spell is really effective against goblins. The Goblin Cave is brightly lit. Now that is because of the campfire that's in here. It's produced a lot of smoky haze, but this cave is well lit. The whole thing, right to about back to about here. So consider this an area that you don't need to actually have a torch, which means nobody's going to have disadvantage or a -5 on passive perception or a perception check. Everything can be seen clearly. Read out or paraphrase this box text and then ask the questions what they want to do when they get to this location. Sneak up to the eating cave can be achieved by the player characters with a stealth check as the goblins are tending the fire. Okay. Now, when will they be given away? So they can sneak up to this point. They'll be going to probably get given away about this point. So even if they sneak up, they can probably get about that far, and then the goblins know they're there, because they're worrying more about what's going on with the fire and their food than anything else. I recommend again the sleep spell. Can put a lot of the goblins down in one turn, which will really help. Yimmick is close enough to Sildar Hallwinter, who is this person in chains over here, that he could get a blade to his throat in just one turn and kill him, and he's only on 1 hit point. Okay, so this is kind of how it's been set up, the situation. And so there's a good chance that Sildar might die. Now, the leader, Yimmick, can be negotiated with for the release of his captive, Sildar Hallwinter. So there is an opportunity, even if the goblin puts a knife up to the throat of Sildar Hallwinter, you can use ready to action as a dungeon master and wait to see what the players do. And if they do something that's threatening, then Sildar dies. And if they don't and they cooperate, Sildar has a proposition. I say Yimmick has a proposition. Yimmick might try to convince the player characters to defeat Klarg. He secretly loathes Klarg. Yimmick does. This is this leader of the goblin leader here. You could also find yourself in a situation where you could pay money. Like the leader would probably be happy to pay money for Sildar Hallwinter. The only time this is probably not going to happen is openly. So they're probably going to be a sort of a private discussion so that some of the other goblins don't know what's going on. It can be done because there's plenty of space over here in this cave, right? Role-playing Sildar Hallwinter is on page 11 of the adventure. You will also find a video on my channel if you're having trouble role-playing that character. And Yimmick can also, you can also find information on role-playing Yimmick on page 10 and 11, and you will also find a video on how to do that on my channel as well. It's very likely that Sildar Hallwinter will be killed by Yimmick because the goblin leader is going to betray the characters at some point. No matter what deal that the players make with Yimmick, he's probably going to do something that is untoward at the right time. Now, if Sildar Hallwinter survives, he can travel and fight with the party if he's healed and equipped with weapons and armor. Most likely a goblin bow. It would be silly to put Sildar Hallwinter in the front line, even though that is one of his better skills, is probably fighting in the front line. Even if the player characters don't give him any healing and he's on 1 hit point, he can still engage in long bow attack, short bow attacks for the party if you want to bring him along. You might decide it's better to just move him out of the cave. We'll see what the players want to do, right? Okay. Area 7 over here, which is the Twin Pool Cave. Again, when you get to this location, read out or paraphrase the box text and adjust it. You're going to adjust it if the dams have been released, which they probably will have been. Ask the players again what they want to do when they get to about here. Yep, around this location here. Ask them what they want to do. It takes only an action for a single goblin to release the dam. I know that's the first thing you're probably thinking is like, oh, okay, so when the goblin runner moves and lets them know that the dam needs to be released, like how difficult is it to do? It's nice and simple. Make it simple for yourself. Don't get complicated about it. Potentially, there's 3 to 4 goblins will have set up an ambush in the Twin Pools Cave with longbows ready for anybody along the stream passageway here or coming along the bridge, because that's possible they might come along the bridge as well. It just depends on whether you've moved the goblin from the bridge over to this Twin Pools area or not. The goblins in the cave can pull back, and they probably will if things go badly, to Klarg's cave. And even, look, if the bugbear is informed, and you could have all the runners inform the bugbear, then the bugbear is probably going to insist they all come to his main cave, and then the players have got a really bad situation where they've got to fight everybody all at once, which you don't really want them to have to deal with, but it can happen. Player characters can negotiate and intimidate or bribe the goblins in this area. Well, they can't really. I would say it'd be impractical. Now, why is that? It's because, guess what? The leader, Klarg, the bugbear, is way too close to these goblins for them to be able to negotiate or have a discussion or plan anything without being discovered, either by Klarg or the 2 goblin guards that he has in this chamber. So they're probably not going to do that. They probably know that they can't be negotiated with, intimidated, or bribed. So you're probably going to have to fight these goblins in this location. Right, the last location, which is Klarg's cave. I would suggest when you get to this location, as always, read out or paraphrase the box text. Ask the players what they want to do. Klarg will likely know the player characters are coming, because there will be plenty of opportunities for runners to run off and inform somebody of what's going on. Usually they use the fisher. Well, actually, no, unless they use the fisher. Look, probably the only time that Klarg is not going to know that they're coming is when they decide to climb up the fissure in area 3, where the kennel is. Role-playing Klarg is on page 12 of the adventure, and you will find another video on my channel explaining how to play Klarg. Basically, play Klarg like a dickhead, because that's really what a bugbear is. Klarg the bugbear is unlikely to surrender. It's not something that bugbears like to do, but the goblins might if the bugbear leader is defeated. So if you are in a position where you're winning and the goblins lose their leader, then it is entirely possible that they can be convinced to drop their weapons, because goblins are cowardly and they don't want to die. And goblins are quite happy, given if there's an opportunity to run away, they will run away as well. There is a back door that would allow them to do that if they wanted to. But they just can't run away while Klarg the bugbear is around. Consider having Klarg use the 2 potions of healing in the battle. I know it's supposed to be part of the treasure, but you might find that that makes more sense, that Klarg would have them on him. Why would you have 2 potions of healing and leave them in a stash for somebody to come and collect later on, rather than have them tied to your own belt? It makes much more sense. So that is sort of the basics in terms of the different areas. There's just a couple of other things I want to point out before we move on and actually go through a playthrough of this location for those of you who are interested. Not necessarily everybody, I suspect. So there's I'm just going to put the screen up here so you can see the map for now and just explain 6 points for you. Okay. Resting in the Cragmaw Hideout is not practical for player characters. If they haven't cleared it out, they will need to go and move to a good distance from the cave, away from the cave mouth, rather than setting up a camp outside the cave mouth. That would be a very silly thing to do. Okay, so they need to move further away to actually do their rests, if they want to do a short rest or a long rest. A long rest runs the risk of Sildar Hallwinter winding up getting eaten by the goblins, by the way. The treasure on page 12 of the adventure can be expanded if you want. But it's already pretty extensive, but you don't have to worry too much about like not adding stuff. You can add stuff. It's not a big deal. Don't forget the Lion Shield Costa supplies that can be loaded onto the wagon the party already has. Like, there's enough supplies in the final cave, right, in Area 8, that they could take those and return them to the Lion Shield Costa, because the stamp of the Lion Shield Costa is all over them, and get the reward for that. I know a lot of people have sort of said, well, they had to go get a separate wagon, but look, just allow the players to load that onto the existing wagon they already have. Non-player character party members, it's better to get the responsibility over to a player than to try and run them yourself as a dungeon master, right? You've got a lot to do as a dungeon master already, so I would suggest, if you're going to allow them to run Sildar Hallwinter with them and travel with them, and he's probably more than willing to fight alongside them, then have one of the players who are feeling comfortable enough to actually do that for you and reduce the dungeon master workload that you have. What the goblins know, if questioned or interrogated, is on page 8. Don't forget that. All of the goblins have a lot of information they can divulge, including the location of Cragmaw Castle, where Gundren Rockseeker is being held. Yep. Remember, if the player characters rescue Sildar Hallwinter and escort him to Phandelver, they get extra gold pieces, okay, for the group. The group gets a total of 50 gold pieces for getting Sildar Hallwinter back to Phandelver, or to Phandelver, alive. Not dead, alive. Award experience points of 275 for each player character at the end of the conclusion of this part of the adventure, or just give them a new character level if you're using milestones. That's the easiest way to deal with all of that. And that should get you pretty much where you need to be.